Hello everyone. So it's been a hot minute since I last talked about my PC and the quest to come up with a competent budget gaming rig, and I figured I would toss out an update. For those of you that wanted me to stay an entry-level purist, I'm sorry, but I've long surpassed that mark. As of right now, this computer has more power than any of my previous computers combined. For quite a while, my computer had an A10, I think a 6800K, 8 gigs of RAM, and a 1050 Ti. It was a great little config and it did really well for me, but I just wasn't happy with how games ran, and the fact that my 1050 Ti couldn't reach its full potential under that processor, it frustrated me a little bit. So for starters, I sold my Xbox One to get some money together for upgrades and saved for a short while until I could afford to change platforms completely. From Socket FM2, I jumped to LGA 1155 with an i7 3770. A third gen i7, I hear you say. Why would you go with Ivy Bridge in 2019? Well, for one, this processor is extremely competent for its price point. You can go as far as a 1080 with minimal bottlenecking, and it supports up to 32 gigabytes of RAM. So I figure with this processor I'll be good for many years to come. And after all this, my next upgrade target was my 1050 Ti. Reason being, I had just gotten a mixed reality headset, and while the 1050 can definitely handle some VR you throw at it, nobody said it handled it well. So I started hunting for a good deal on a higher power GPU. The 980 Ti immediately came to mind due to the fact that you can use multiple in SLI and they have about the same power as the 1060. However, due to the amount of power they consume and how brutally hot they get, I decided to pass on that. But the 1060, now that is a wallet-friendly GPU. Following the crash of Bitcoin late last year, miners are selling their cards left and right for dirt cheap. At first, I picked up a Zotac 1066GB from a former Bitcoin miner, but unfortunately that died about 20 days in. So I returned it and got an MSI Gaming X 1066GB, which by the way is an absolutely massive card, but the thermals are amazing. This thing wouldn't hit 70C if you ran it in a desert at noon sharp, I swear to God. And up to now, it's been the card I've been using. I might upgrade to a 1070 in the future, but that's a long ways off. Besides, I really don't think there are many situations where you would require more power than the 1060 offers, especially since the MSI model runs at 2 actual gigahertz. So, current specs. As of right now, the computer is rocking an i7 3770 at 3.6 GHz with 4 cores and 8 threads, and it boosts up to 3.9 on all cores with the correct motherboard settings. An MSI 1060 6GB and 16GB of RAM clocking at 1333 MHz. The RAM situation is a little funky. I tossed some spare RAM from one of my DDR3 systems I had lying about into my gaming PC knowing it was lower speed than the RAM that was in the system, and to my surprise it boots and runs with this RAM just fine, although it does seem to be underclocking to 1600 MHz stick-to-match speeds. And now for the benchmarks. Grand Theft Auto 5 runs at 74 FPS with the minimum being 53. 1% lows and 0.1% lows are very close together at 47 and 32, indicating little or no stutter. This is probably the smoothest running game in this lineup according to the numbers, and this was recorded on a mix of very high and high settings. Fallout 4 manages 59 FPS average with the minimum being 46. 1 and 0.1% lows are rather far apart at 50 and 13, indicating a bit of stutter. However, I didn't notice it in-game. Overall, it was a pretty perfect experience, and I really couldn't find a way to turn off VSync, which doesn't help the higher frame rate averages. But letting NVIDIA's GeForce Experience optimize the settings for me is a really good way to keep 60 smooth the entire time I'm playing. Subnautica gives us an average of 70 with a minimum of 0, which I imagine was recorded during the loading screens. 1% and 0.1% lows are 11 and 0, which would indicate low range stutter. However, as I said in my last benchmarking video, Subnautica kinda does this, and I blame the Unity engine for that. These numbers were recorded with the settings in-game maxed out. Unturned, it is seemingly hard to run game, runs a 74 FPS average with the minimum being 57. 1% and 0.1% lows are 48 and 11, which means overall the game ran fairly smoothly, and it was a pretty good experience. Results were recorded with a mix of ultra, high, and medium settings. And finally, Just Cause 3, which gave us a 74 FPS average with 9.4 as our minimum. And the percent lows are sitting at 19.7 and 2.4. I never felt the stutter these indicate in-game, and over a 30-minute test period it ran beautifully. Numbers are recorded with the in-game settings maxed out and optimized via NVIDIA GeForce Experience. And as always, I need to bring up whether or not I would follow this upgrade path. Well, Yes and no. Depends on whether or not you want to have to hunt for a motherboard for a really long time. Unfortunately, these 1155 motherboards are getting quite scarce and expensive, and I'm lucky to have bought into it when I did. After trying to go the same route with my friend's PC and critically failing on the motherboard part, it ended up being dead on arrival. I've kind of figured out that these things are a pain in the ass to find. I would definitely get an Intel Media Series board if you're going 3rd gen, and an Intel Executive Series board if you're going 2nd gen. Although, please note that these motherboards are a little ugly, they're basic, and that the Media Series supports every 1155 chip, even the Xeon. The Media Series is very reliable and they're very common, so they shouldn't be too hard to find. In the near future, I've got a few upgrades planned. Like I said, in the very distant future, I would love to have a 1070, but as many of you know, it's tax season, and when I get my return, I plan on getting a nice windowed case, some matching RAM sticks, I'm still gonna have 16GB, and a higher wattage, fully modular power supply, purely due to the fact that my 400-watt PSU is failing. Unless I give the computer an SSD to boot from, the system sucks so much power from the PSU on its own that it has a hard time keeping a spinning drive spun up and running. I suspect bad capacitors due to too much load over time, but at least it didn't fail catastrophically. I really can't complain as I knew I was stressing it out. And that's really all I have to say for my budget project as of right now. In total, so far I've spent an even $1,000 on the entire project, but you have to consider that that's the cost from every step up to this point. To build the system in front of me from scratch would really only cost you about $700. And, as a side note, I put together a nice mobile gaming setup with a bunch of the spare parts from this as I upgraded, consisting of a ThinkPad L430 and an external GTX 1050 Ti. I plan on covering the entire process involved in putting together such a setup in another video. Anyways, thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more content like this in the future, and I'll be seeing you in the next one. Goodbye!